Hello everyone. In my last video in this series, I had left you at the point where I had moved into my little flat and I was still seeing the person that I had met while treating for verruca. If you want to hear what happened next, stick around. Now, I did carry on seeing this person for a little while, but it very soon became apparent that the reason I stopped seeing him the first time, it was still as relevant then as it had been in the past. He was extremely parsimonious, so mean, and I don't have a mean bone in my body. I really do love to give. And when I come across people who are so terribly tight-fisted, I find it a bit like BO. I just can't stand it. And in the end, I thought, for once, no, I'm not going to carry this on. So I stopped going out with him. And then for a while, I had a period of not going out with anybody. And I just carried on working and looking after my daughter. And life was good until I met somebody else. Now, during this time, I was going to work in my ex-husband's house in my surgery. The new girlfriend had moved in. She didn't want my husband's daughter to go in the house and wait for me to finish work. I mean, this is her father's house. But she didn't want that. She decided that my daughter would have to sit in our waiting room and just wait all day for me because I didn't have childminding during the holidays. She wasn't allowed in her father's house, this 8-year-old. I went to see a solicitor. He was extremely tall. He said that he would sort it out for me. As it happens, he didn't. He didn't sort it out for me at all. He started contacting me regularly. What is called these days love bombing. It wasn't a thing then, honestly, it really wasn't. There are so many new terms that I have had to come to grips with, like narcissist, love bombing, coercive control. All of that wasn't a thing then. It just wasn't. In the 90s, it wasn't a thing. Nobody had social media, particularly. Maybe they had Facebook, but all the rest of it, where you find these things out, weren't a thing. If you've ever been love bombed, I can tell you that it is very seductive. You put your own brain on hold and you start to believe what is in front of your eyes. I wouldn't now, because I'm far more skeptical now. And in truth, I have changed completely from those days. But then, yes, I was susceptible. I fell for it. He loved bombed me, and he said all of the right things, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. We started going out together. He would spend a lot of time on the telephone to me in the evening. After a few months, he told me that he had a financial problem, that the legal aid board were late in sending him his funds that he had. He really needed bailing out. It was a lot of money. He said that he would very quickly pay me back. So I thought, here it is. I thought because he was a solicitor, he was trustworthy. That's very, very wrong. So I did lend it to him. And actually, he did come through. He paid it back in a very timely fashion, and that was okay. unfortunately, that behaviour carried on. He would ask me if I could loan him some money, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. I would loan him it. And he said, I will pay you back. A couple of times he did, and I got it back. However, when I loaned him money again, by that time, I had moved out of my flat and I had purchased a dormer bungalow and I was having work done to it. He kept coming back for more, and he'd moved in with me by that time. He'd moved in with me and I was repeatedly lending him money because he said, if you don't, then all the people in my office will lose their jobs, and you wouldn't want that on your conscience, would you? It will be your fault. If I were then the person that I am now, I wouldn't have loaned him the money in the first place. But I did. And I have to take responsibility for that. He didn't hold a gun to my head. I was foolish. I wasn't even thinking it through. At times, I had this foghorn going off at the back of my brain saying, well, surely, he's a successful lawyer, he shouldn't need this. But then I'd ignore it. Or he would argue with me. And, I don't like arguing. He would argue with me and say, well, I need this because of X, Y, and Z. And, if you don't, then everybody will lose their jobs, etc. So this behaviour carried on over and over again. We were together for 3 years. It culminated in him asking me to marry him, and I did. And we had this marriage, and I found out later that he hadn't even told the people at his office that he was getting married. He said he was going on holiday. That is terribly devious, isn't it? Terribly devious. In the end, he owed me a vast amount of money. I had remortgaged my house. I had remortgaged my flat over and over again to give him the money in the hope, and this is insanity, in the hope that I would get it back, because if I didn't loan him the money, the business would go under, he said. Now, I can hear you screaming at your phone or your computer or your television saying, you stupid woman, and yes, I acknowledge that. I was stupid and I would never do it again, but I did it then, and I have to take responsibility for my complete stupidity. So, we'd got married. He'd said he was going on holiday. Very shortly after that, he became violent. This man was 6'4" or 5", built like the proverbial brick house. I was astonished. When he became violent, I threw him out. That was 5 weeks after we'd got married. So in total, we were married for just 5 weeks before our marriage ended. It was then that I went to a solicitor. I took the contract that he'd given me about paying me back, because I did actually do that. It was so leaky that really it was very difficult to nail him down. So I spent many weeks, hours of blood, sweat and tears going through every single receipt, checkbook, stamp, everything. And I had to log everything, calculate how much he owed me, and it was a vast amount. Having gone to this solicitor and filed for divorce, he said that he would delay until I ran out of money. But I carried on doing the sums and working out everything, and I took him to court. I was awarded a summary judgment for 1/3. He promptly declared himself bankrupt. I didn't know where he was living. He'd sort of disappeared into the ether. I needed to have somewhere to serve my divorce papers to him, but I didn't have one. I had to find out where he was staying. What I did next was quite funny, really. I arranged to meet him. I'm making this sound as if it was very quick, but this was going on for months. I had hired a private investigator. He was worse than useless trying to find him. So I decided to do it myself with a little help. I was talking to a patient of mine, a gentleman who had a motorbike, and he said, "Imogen, why don't you arrange to meet him? And then once he leaves, I will follow him and see where he goes." So I said, "Would you mind?" So he said, "No, not at all." So I arranged to meet him at a pub. He parked his car in the road, but my patient friend was sitting on his motorbike, crash helmet down, covering his face, in the road, waiting for him to leave. As soon as he had left the pub, I phoned my friend and I said he's on his way. So he got ready. As soon as he drove off, my friend followed him at a decent distance, and it turned out, well, he said, "You'll never guess where he's living." And I said, "No, where?" It turned out that he was living 2 roads away. I probably almost walked past his house. He was living with this other woman who probably didn't know what he was capable of or up to. She probably thought he was wonderful. I filed for divorce. I also wrote to the lady he was living with in hopes that forewarned is forearmed. The problem with having that sort of relationship is that all the other relationships that had gone before, I sort of walked into a brick wall, hit my head and thought, "Oh, what was that?" And then carried on into the next relationship. Walking into the brick wall, bang my head, not really recognizing it, and then doing it over and over again. But this one, it just didn't make logical sense. I had worked so hard and put so many hours into his practice, inputting data into the computers, decorating whilst he got his new offices sorted out. The hours and hours and hours of work I gave to him gratis, it didn't make any sense to me. I just couldn't get my head round when somebody is that good to you that you treat them so shoddily. And so I would say that ending that relationship and the fallout and the monetary loss, it was like I had again walked into a brick wall, and this time the entire brick wall crumbled and fell on top of me, whereupon I lay on the ground wondering whether I was still alive or was I dead. I felt like I was lying on the ground for an entire year. I found it very difficult to answer the phone. It was difficult for me to even pay a bill. I would force myself to do it because obviously I had to. The only time I ever went out was to go to work when I put my professional face on and nobody would have known. And for that year, I hibernated for the rest of it. I had things to do in the house. I had decorating to finish, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt like I was in a sea of molasses. I'd never felt that bad before, and it wasn't for the loss of this man. I was glad that I was no longer with him. I just seemed lost. And then one day a friend came round and she said, it was 6 o'clock, I was in my pyjamas already, and she said, "Imogen, we're going to go out." And I said, "Oh, I don't want to." So she said, come on, I'm taking you out. The next morning I decided that I needed to give myself a jolly up to get stuff done. I decided that I would paint one rung of the staircase. If I did that for that day, then I had a triumph. But when you start getting all your painting stuff out, you've got the brushes, you've got the tray, and you've got the paint and all the rest of it. Once you've done that, you might as well do another one and then another one until you get fed up. And it was by doing that I got the staircase done. And over the next couple of months, I worked through all of my bits and bobs until I got it all done. It was a method of coping, I suppose, but I still felt a dreadful dread that I might meet him in the high street. It was a physical feeling, and I did see him a couple of times and I hid. It felt like he had punched me in my chest. Eventually, as you do, I got divorced. Thankfully, even that wasn't without its problems. He had put a hold on the funds of my house. He had not paid anything. I had kept him all that time. He always had an excuse. He had never contributed, but he had put a hold on my funds, and it took another meeting with my solicitor to actually get that taken off. This man had no bounds to which he wouldn't stoop to. So I was very, very pleased to be divorced. I stayed single for a while then. Unsurprisingly, I still kept all the paperwork from my court case about the money, even though I had gathered evidence whilst I was paying the private investigator. He loaned me a tape recorder to record my phone calls with my husband, which I did. He was telling me his various scams and how he was earning money. He actually said, solicitors make the best crooks. I mean, what a thing to say. I had that all on tape. Well, yes, I had it all on tape. And then another patient of mine took the tapes for me and put them onto CD. And then I transcribed hours of recordings and I sent them to the person in charge of his bankruptcy. He said he'd been joking and he got away with it. I mean, talk about Teflon. He got away with it. They did nothing with all the evidence that I had gathered, and he got away with that too. And of course, with bankruptcies in England, after a few years, it's all wiped off your slate. You can start again, as if you've never owed anybody thousands and thousands of pounds. And yet, I never became bitter, and I think that saved my sanity. I have never felt bitter about any of it, any parts of my life. I have deliberately chosen to find some benefit in what I've learned, and by doing that, I managed to switch the paradigm I felt myself in. I think by learning all these lessons, it has made me into not only an empathetic person, but a far more aware person. Unfortunately, those courses did cost me a dreadful amount of money. You have to find a way of coping with these things, and that is mine. That's what I do. That's why I can remain calm. I know you're thinking, what a fool, but that's how I cope, and it works for me. The next relationship I actually met on a dating website, and he was another solicitor, but that's another story. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.